What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and we've taken a look at some of my favorite games from four specific consoles. Those being the Nintendo Switch, the Nintendo 3DS, the Nintendo GameCube, and of course the Game Boy Advance. Considering there are a lot of consoles out there, it kind of makes it hard to find specific games that I found to make a favorite list. Like for both DS and PS3, I don't have enough that could essentially make for a top 10 list of my favorite games from those consoles. And as for games like consoles like Wii U, PS4, PS5, and even the Switch 2, I don't have those consoles to play the games on them. However, there's one game I remember playing a lot, and that's the Nintendo 64. One of the first home consoles I ever got as a kid. And I played it a lot. So much that even now I still get excitement in playing Nintendo 64 games. So at this point, kind of makes me wonder what makes me want to talk about some of my favorites for the N64. And that's what this list is all about. So, it's time to count down. In this case, the main rule is they have to be games I've played at least in some way, shape, or form. And that being said, I at least have to remember them. But that being said, without further ado, it's time to count down my top 10 favorite Nintendo 64 games. Starting off first, at number 10, we have Paper Mario. Yeah. Surprisingly enough, if you're not a little heads up here, there's gonna be a lot of Mario on this one. But surprisingly enough, in terms of Paper Mario, as far as everyone knows, I started playing through the Paper Mario franchise with Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door on the Nintendo GameCube. So, I didn't play the first entry in the series until much later. But basically, after playing through both Thousand Year and enjoying Thousand Year Door and Origami King, which was somewhat of a return to form for the franchise, as well as playing through and enduring all the hatred for Sticker Star, I kind of made an effort to play through the other Paper Mario games just to get a sort of my own opinion as to which Paper Mario entries I like. And of course, the original Paper Mario title was the first on the docket. Granted, I mostly played through the original Paper Mario game through emulation on my phone, but the furthest I actually got was through the Nintendo Switch Online system for the on their N64 emulator. In all fairness, I really love this. This game is actually pretty good. I mean, not only does it have a nice little bit of a storybook feel to it, but all the partners in the in the original Paper Mario are all have a sort of personality that really makes them endearing to everyone. I mean, Goombario's just this tag-along kid who idolizes Mario and wants to be a hero like him. You got Bombette, who's a really sassy individual for a Babam. Sushi, who's basically this, well, overworked caretaker who more or less has a hard time just wrangling in all of the rambunctious Yoshi kids on Yoshi Island. Lackluster just basically is a guy who wants to be seen as cool, but can't help but to be embarrassed by his actual name. And Lady Bo, well, let's be real, ghost waifu for life. Just honestly, Lady Bo is the high point of the original Paper Mario partners. Heck, even the bosses are enjoyable as well. And funny too. I mean, how would the partners in the bosses compare to Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door? Well, Thousand Year Door may be ahead in terms of partners, but in terms of bosses, the original Paper Mario really stands the test of time. Just, that's kind of my opinion. Granted, I still like Sticker Star, let's just be real. Moving on next at number 9, we have Conker's Bad Fur Day. Oh man. It's kind of weird when you think about it, but it's kind of funny how Rare had a very noticeable run of amazing titles on the N64. And that's especially saying a lot considering they ended up getting sold off to Microsoft. But when it comes down to it, many of their titles are some of the best. And one of the most notable ones is Conker's Bad Fur Day. And who would have expected a kind of foul-mouthed, hard-drinking red squirrel to be such an icon? And considering everything, I've had a sort of interesting experience with this. As, again, I was first introduced to Conker's Bad Fur Day when I was a kid. Basically in like 4th or 5th grade. Yeah, I was in 4th and 5th grade, and I played an M-rated N64 game. In fact, back then, I was introduced to this game by one of my friends back then, who, granted, and then I used to be babysit by his aunt, and sometimes he would essentially be there whenever his aunt came to either pick me up from school or take me to school. And sometimes, if I was there when she came to pick me up from school, sometimes we'd end up upstairs and playing his N64. Specifically, the original Conker's Bad Fur Day. And I really loved, and basically, granted it was the multiplayer, but it was my first taste of the game, and in fairness, I was enthralled. And ever since then, I wanted more of this game, but couldn't easily find it. Or mainly it was because back then my mom more or less was kind of a little stricter with the things I was exposed to. And since Conker's Bad Fur Day was M-rated, yeah, that means I couldn't really play it at home. But as time went on, I eventually got I was eventually allowed to indulge in the more mature things. And this was the same with Conker's Bad Fur Day. Of course, I did also watch a few Let's Plays of the game, especially when it came to the single player campaign. But I first got a chance to play through the game myself, again, on my N64 emulator on my phone. And in all fairness, I really love this game. It's fun, it's funny, it's a little bit of has a bit of irreverent humor that I enjoy, and honestly, there are a lot of iconic moments in the game that some I never got to, that honestly, I'm surprised I wouldn't have remembered all this time later. And honestly, I have to say this, Nintendo, you have the M plus 17 in part for the Nintendo 64 emulator. You already gave us the likes of Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and Donkey Kong 64. Please put Conker's Bad Fur Day on the N64 emulator. Please. It's an iconic cult classic. And so many people deserve to witness and experience this game for themselves. Please. Moving on next at number 8, we have GoldenEye 007. Yeah. This is another game that I haven't played much of for the single player campaign, but I was initially introduced through the multiplayer campaign. And that's not for nothing, as when it comes down to James Bond as a whole, I already have some experience with watching a lot of James Bond movies thus far. Specifically, Skyfall, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. So, basically, the fact that GoldenEye 007 was my first encounter was kind of my first encounter to James Bond as a whole. And even with that, it still, the fact that it's on the N64 emulator on the Switch for the Switch Online service means that I have the means to play through the single player campaign. But that being said, most of my memory just stays a lot in terms of the multiplayer campaign. And most of it comes from the fact that I was first introduced to it by some of my cousins. As basically, I have a lot of family members, and some of them live in like either Galway or Colonia. But that being said, the most I remember as a kid is visiting my one group of family members, and they had an N64, and most of the time, me and some of my cousins would be hanging out downstairs playing the N64, either WWE wrestling, or GoldenEye 007. Granted, most of the time I get a chance to play, sometimes, and honestly, in fairness, I really would stink at it. But I enjoyed spending time either watching my cousins play it or playing it myself. And I had a lot of fun. And as thanks to my cousin Philip, my cousin Marquise, and my cousin Michael, who we call Kumbo, I basically wouldn't have remembered GoldenEye's 007 all these years later. And it really says a lot. And thankfully enough, none of us played Odd Job. And played as Odd Job in GoldenEye 007's multiplayer. Even I wasn't that insane enough to play as that tiny little weasel. If you know, you know. Moving on next at number 7, we have Pokemon Stadium 2. Yeah. Surprisingly enough, as someone who has Pokemon as one of his 2, autistic special interests, yeah, it comes as a surprise that I have a Pokemon game this low. But for the most part, that's just a testament to how many amazing games were on this system. Something has to give. That being said, surprisingly enough, Fire Emblem was the only one that wasn't on the N64. Although, now that I think about it, I wish we had gotten Fire Emblem 64, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, in terms of the Pokemon games, I actually had I'd say all 4 of the main noticeable Pokemon games on the N64, minus Hey You Pikachu. And while I do love Pokemon Snap, as it was the game that basically got me into photography, and Pokemon Puzzle League was one of the few that allowed me to work my mental muscle while enjoying a lot of the same stylings as the Pokemon anime. It was the Pokemon Stadium games that really got that Pokemon itch. As basically, again, these are just Pokemon battle simulators. And granted, I know as of recently, these things it's really taken off with the likes of games with the likes of things like Pokemon Showdown or Pokemon Champions. But in all fairness, both Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2 were basically where where competitive Pokemon walked before Pokemon Showdown could run and Pokemon Champions could soar. That being said, which of the stadium games were my favorite? Honestly, has to be Pokemon Stadium 2, as while it did focus on more of the Gen 2 battle mechanics, considering how glitchy and broken the original Pokemon and the original Gen 1 battle mechanics were. But it had a sort of a fun vibe to it, as I enjoyed a lot of things from it, like the Gym Leader Castle. I remember the Gym Leader Castle giving us a full-on castle style for the Johto Gym Leaders in Elite Four, as well as a separate one for separate tower style for Kanto. The cups the main stadium cups being enjoyable, with Challenge Cup giving you different random rental teams that you got a chance to use, and the Trainers Academy adding giving you a few nice little tests, which are really enjoyable. However, like GoldenEye 007 and Conker's Bad Fur Day, I have a few very good memories about this game. Again, more often than not, if anyone remembers how back during the 90s and the 2000s, they had like video game kiosks where you got a chance to play a recently released video game in store. Yeah. Once I visited a Walmart in like Piscataway, either Piscataway or Parsippany, I don't know which, and I got a chance to play Pokemon Stadium at the video game area of a Walmart there. And I enjoyed every minute of it. But the big one came when I spent time with another group of cousins. And granted, that group of cousins basically also introduced me to several more games on this list, so you got that there. So, yeah. They're going to be mentioned a lot. But considering how I was living with them when both my parents weren't around. Well, they were still alive, but they weren't around during during this time. I had a good chance. I basically ended up spending time living with them. As such, I got into a lot of different things. One of which I ended up getting a strategy guide for Pokemon Stadium 2. And honestly, I spent a lot of time reading it. And reading and rereading through it. So basically, I ended up using some of the knowledge I got from that strategy guide in the game proper. So yeah, it kind of allows me to remember that time. And granted, I was in 5th or 6th grade when I was living with them, so yeah, it's kind of a bright spot in that time. So yeah, really says it. Moving on next at number 6, we have Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards. Yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to Kirby, honestly, in every console, Kirby's had an amazing game. Granted, I've not played Kirby Air Ride for the GameCube, so I don't have experiences with that. But if you hadn't already guessed, I really adore Kirby and the Forgotten Land for the Switch, and Kirby Planet Robobot for the GameCube. So, if you're possibly wondering, how did I enjoy Kirby's N64 outing? And honestly, it is one of the best outings that this little pink puffball has been on. That is one of the best that I've ever seen. And keep in mind, at this point, I am stuck on the Magman boss. Yeah. It proves how challenging this game is if I'm stuck on a boss like Magman. But honestly, even with that, this art style is just so amazingly beautiful. Again, keeping up with the nice little storybook style that Paper Mario also went through. But more so like it's being drawn with crayons. A lot of the characters are just amazing. I mean, this is the first time... It's the first time we're introduced with a more somewhat kind of frenemy style King Dedede that we get in later entries like Triple Deluxe, Return to Dreamland, and Forgotten Land. And it introduced us to characters like Adeline and Ribbon. And like many other people, well, Adeline is a surprising character that I'm surprised has not gotten a lot of, love from the Kirby franchise as a whole. I mean, heck, Susie gets more love from the franchise. Magolor in the Kirby franchise than Adeline. Magolor gets more gets more love. Marks gets more love. Darroach gets more love. Even the animal buddies. I mean, I'm surprised Adeline hasn't gotten that much love. And especially whenever she's paired with Ribbon. As, again, both of them are kind of adorable. And honestly, I wouldn't mind Adeline being in the next Smash entry. Granted, if there's one thing I am not looking forward to facing off against, it's 02. Namely because of, if you know, you know. But other than that, it's a perfect middle-of-the-road pick. That's all I have to say. Moving on next at number 5, we have Mario Kart 64. Oh man, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes. And yeah, if you remember the cousins that I used to live with in that particular time in my life when I was in 5th or 6th grade, yeah, honestly, it was thanks to them that I was introduced to many different franchises. And of course, one of them was the Mario Kart franchise. if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had this huge love for the Mario Kart franchise as a whole. And that's mainly because they had the original Mario Kart 64 for their Nintendo. They had Nintendo 64 all their own, as well as the original Mario Kart 64 for the console. And honestly, it was, considering how I was able, whenever we went to visit them for like either Sunday dinner or Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, what have you, or even at that point when I lived with them, I got a chance to play, more often than not, I got a chance to play the Nintendo 64, since they had that in their basement. And honestly, I more or less very much enjoyed it. And it was one of my favorite moments, just playing through the game. But that being said, even with that, even before I got a chance to live with them, they allowed me to basically borrow the game so I could play it on my own N64 at home. And it was one of those games that I enjoyed, as I spent a lot of time playing through Mario Kart 64 myself, and I got a chance to play, and basically I spent a lot of time racing through the game. And it was the most enjoyable experience I ever had. But even with that, it was kind of a fun point in my life that I enjoyed. And ever since then, I've been hooked on the Mario Kart franchise. And it's very fair to say, whenever there was a new entry in the Mario Kart franchise, I've wanted to play it more often than not, which led me to playing through entries like Double Dash, DS, 7, 8/8 Deluxe, and eventually games like Super Circuit, Super Mario Kart, Mario Kart Wii, and even Mario Kart World. And honestly, it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had. And keep in mind, one of my cousins that introduced me to that, she has a son of her own, being Cameron. And she has a son of her own named Cameron. So basically, he is essentially my little cousin. And in all fairness, I really hope that I could essentially do the same thing and introduce him to some of the things I grew up on. One of which being Mario Kart. And basically give him the same experiences with the franchise that I had growing up. Granted, it's not the only one that basically I was introduced to thanks to my cousins. Because there's, again, still one or two more that I was introduced to as well. So yeah. We're not done with memory lane quite yet. Moving on, next at number 4, we have Banjo-Kazooie. Oh boy. Would you believe me if I said I never played Banjo-Kazooie or Banjo-Tooie growing up as a kid. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Well, I mean, fully, when you think about it. Because again, a lot involving the N64 I played through. I either got an N64 or Game Boy game, or Game Boy Color game, for either my birthday or for Christmas. I was introduced to it by one of my cousins, or I borrowed it from Blockbuster. And yeah, if anyone remembers Blockbuster, yeah, congratulations. You remember a peak time for most of us who were born in the 90s, who were born in and grew up during the 90s. That being said, while I did play through Banjo-Kazooie, I didn't play through it all through. I borrowed it from Blockbuster, but I had a hard time playing through it, and I kinda got stuck on the game, so... And knowing how I was as a kid, yeah, it was enough to frustrate me to more or less give up on the game. Which is kind of disappointing, but also at that point may have been an early sign of my autism. But again, we don't know. But that being said, it took me a while, and after hearing a lot of people raving about the original Banjo-Kazooie, I've wanted to essentially find some way to play the game. And even watching a lot of a Let's Play or two of Banjo-Kazooie to enjoy it for myself. That being said, I finally got a chance last year to play through the original Banjo-Kazooie. And like I did when I was able to borrow it from Blockbuster, yeah, it also kinda... I also didn't get that far. But even with that, I still kept trying, and I was able to essentially give Banjo-Kazooie another shot. And while I didn't get as far as I did my first two times, I was able to I still have a chance to... I still am making an effort to try and play through the entire game. And even with that, there are a lot of things about this game that I enjoy. The art style, again, is amazing. Seriously, Rare knocked it out of the park as much as they did with Conker's Bad Fur Day and, well, arguably GoldenEye 007. But even with that, the humor is just funny. Grant Kirkhope's soundtrack is just amazing. And a lot of the worlds are just beautiful and have this sort of, well, whimsy that you don't see in many other games for the N64. I mean, even though I haven't gotten to those areas as yet, I still remember Freeze Peak, Mad Monster Mansion, and Rusty Bucket Bay from watching a Let's Play of Banjo-Kazooie. So, yeah, really says a lot. And that being said, hopefully, after playing through the original Banjo-Kazooie, I might find a way to give Banjo-Tooie a try. Jury's still out on Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, though. Just... yeah. After seeing JonTron's visceral reaction to the game, yeah, jury's still out. Moving on next at number 3, we have Super Smash Brothers! Yeah. Surprisingly enough, out of all of the games I was introduced to by my cousins, it's this one. And these are the same cousins that, again, that introduced me to the Mario Kart franchise by letting me borrow their copy of Mario Kart 64. As again, another game they'd let me borrow, so I could play at my house, was the original Super Smash Bros. For the N64. And honestly, while I wasn't as easily hooked on the franchise as I was with Mario Kart, Smash Brothers is one of my few games that I really enjoy. And again, it was essentially the first, and for the longest time, the only fighting game franchise I ever had some noticeable knowledge of. And I was very intrigued at how the Smash Brothers and how the franchise was. As you basically had it where you had a chance to have many different video game icons fight each other. Like, what would happen if Mario faced off against Link? Or Pikachu faced off against Kirby? The possibilities were endless, and I enjoyed every moment of it. And for a while I'm not a competitive fighting game expert, I basically, for a while, I could have essentially become a regular on the competitive Smash Brothers circuit if other franchises didn't take over as my special interests. But even with that, it's thanks to my initial effort of the Smash franchise, I wouldn't have essentially gotten titles like Melee or Smash 4 for the Smash Brothers for the 3DS. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been tuning in very closely to the Smash Ultimate DLC reveals when they had them. Or anything involving Smash Ultimate and the characters that they introduced. And even with that, if it wasn't for Smash Brothers, I wouldn't have been introduced to many of some of my favorite franchises. Like, I wouldn't have had Fire Emblem as one of my autistic special interests if it wasn't for Super Smash Brothers for the N64, or allowing me to want to pick up Melee for the GameCube. I wouldn't have learned about franchises like Kid Icarus, Kirby, Xenoblade, Final Fantasy, Earthbound, or even Dragon Quest or Persona if it wasn't for this game. Yeah. So basically in this case, if it wasn't for the original Super Smash Brothers, I wouldn't have been the video game fan that I was. I wouldn't have been the video game fan that I am today. And I thank this game and my cousins for introducing me to a wider world of video games. It's kind of surprising. Moving on next at number 2, we have The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Honestly, considering my cousins had their own copy of Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, again, I didn't borrow this copy. I didn't borrow it as much as I did Super Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart 64. But when it comes down to it, I definitely remember Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And largely it was because I actually bought a used copy of the game for the N64 when I was a kid. And when I first put the cartridge into the console, and I saw that dream sequence, honestly, I was not just floored, but I was drawn into an entire fantasy world of swords and magic that I wouldn't have expected I would have been interested in. Again, in all fairness, if it wasn't for Ocarina of Time, I wouldn't have gotten into things like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. And honestly, it's one of the few games I enjoyed. Granted, in my initial playthrough, where I played it from the beginning, I didn't get past the Great Deku Tree. But fortunately, there is a save file already saved onto the game, and I would normally go into that, and it allowed me to, kind of explore areas that honestly I wouldn't have explored before. Like, I wouldn't have experienced Kakariko Village. Like, if it wasn't for that save file that was already there, I wouldn't have explored Kakariko Village or Death Mountain, Hyrule Castletown, or even Lon Lon Ranch. Honestly, it's just kind of amazing. And even with that, this was sort of, it led me to essentially want to play through the game when the original remake was introduced. It was announced for the Nintendo 3DS. And again, it was thanks to to my copy on the N64 that I used my knowledge from that time playing the game that I was able to get as far as I did in the 3DS remake. Like, all the way into the Water Temple far. And it allowed me to enjoy many other games in the Zelda franchise, because I wouldn't have played through the likes of Majora's Mask for the 3DS, or Wind Waker, or Link Between Worlds, or Skyward Sword, or even Breath of the Wild. And even with that, yeah, the fact that we're now getting a remaster for the Switch 2, honestly, it allowed all my childhood memories of playing the original game on my N64 to come flooding back. And while I'm still kind of confused about the designs of the remaster, I can honestly say I'm excited to possibly get a Switch 2 and experience this game for myself and just let all those childhood memories come flooding back into me. Just honestly, it really says a lot. But oh boy, yeah. If you hadn't realized, if it wasn't for these childhood memories that made Ocarina of Time so iconic to me, why isn't it at number 2? You're possibly wondering. Well, that's because it wasn't the only game that I got as a used copy that I remember having childhood memories for. And that's the number 1 entry, Super Mario 64. Yeah. Honestly, when it comes down to it, at this time, I basically, while I was more or less starting to become a big fan of Pokemon, Mario had some kind of an interesting effect on me. And it really says a lot since, again, when I was like 7 or 8 years old, I got a copy of Super Mario Land for the Game Boy on my birthday, and I spent a lot of time playing it. So much that the Muda Kingdom theme is one of my favorite themes from the game. However, honestly, when it came to Mario's 3D outings, you gotta admit, it has to be Super Mario 64. I mean, what else but this game? I mean, this was Mario's first outing on a full-on home console and his first 3D platformer. And while after all this time it's a little, dare I say, clunky, it still brings a lot of childhood memories. And again, I've brought up some of my cousins introducing me to a lot of these games on this list. But one of the games I remember is Super Mario 64. And it's from the same cousins that allowed me to borrow Super Smash Bros. And Mario Kart 64 so I could play them on my own N64 console. As one of the games they had was Super Mario 64. And the first time my cousins ended up, I ever played the game on their N64, and I was introduced to that the first time I saw them and play it. It was on the third world, which was the water world, and I was more or less enthralled. And keep in mind, the most I had played was Super Mario Land for the Game Boy, the 2D platformer. So I had never thought Mario could have a 3D title. And I was basically so enthralled in it that I wanted to play through it myself. So basically, one time they let me start up a new save file, and I really enjoyed it. And it's not the only time I played through the original Super Mario 64. As again, another one of my friends who of course was a friend of one of my mother's sorority sisters, basically ended up, this was when I was a kid, he had an N64 all his own, and we used to play it a lot when we were there at her house for a cookout. And I enjoyed every moment of it. I mean, heck, it was that same friend who also had Pokemon Red. And also introduced me to the Pokemon franchise as a whole. That being said, oh my god! This game was amazing. And like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, I eventually ended up getting a copy of the game myself. Granted, a used copy of the game, but a copy of the game nonetheless. And while on my usual main save files, where I started from scratch, I would get as far as to the 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th world. But again, like Ocarina of Time, there was a save file already on that. And basically, if it wasn't for that save file, I wouldn't have basically experienced the later worlds in Super Mario 64. Like the third and final boss battle, Tick-Tock Clock, Wet Dry World, Tall Mountain, Tiny Huge Island, Rainbow Ride. Yeah, I would have never experienced that if it wasn't for the save file that was on that. That was already on there. And even with that, if it wasn't for Super Mario 64, I wouldn't have had a love of many of Mario's other 3D outings. I wouldn't have enjoyed Super Mario Sunshine as much as I did. I wouldn't have basically gotten Super Mario 64 or DS, the Super Mario 64 DS for the Nintendo remake, for the remake of Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo DS, and played through the entire game using all of the knowledge that I got from said game. I wouldn't have enjoyed Super Mario Odyssey for the masterpiece that it is. That still is. And even with that, I wouldn't have gotten Super Mario 3D All-Stars and revisited all the childhood memories I had playing through Super Mario 64 and the DS remake when I was a kid and when I was young. Or experiencing Galaxy for the first time. Kind of goes to show that when it comes down to it, some of the things we enjoy wouldn't have happened if we didn't enjoy them in the first place. And honestly, that's something that really stands the test of time. Just, if you have good memories with it, then honestly, it will stick through you. It will stick with you no matter what. And honestly, those good memories I had playing through the N64, and a lot of these games either on emulators or my actual copies on the Nintendo 64 or on the Switch Online, they're always gonna stick with me. That much is true. That being said, those are my top 10 favorite Nintendo 64 games. Like, comment, subscribe, and of course, I am so appreciative at all the support I'm getting. And if you want to, and I hope to bring some amazing content for you in the years to come. Especially since it's been a year since I started around a year since I started my channel. Yeah, it's crazy. So, yeah. I thank everyone for giving me the support I need. And for helping me go through with all this. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. That being said, I'm the Autistic Scyther, and next time, we're gonna basically move on to the Pokemon franchise and seeing what animals would best work as Pokemon. See you then.